In a world where Bruce Arians believes he was more important than Tom Brady, and Major League Baseball can't get out of its own way, and Daniel Gafford is the chalk of the chalk. Welcome, everyone, to the Slate here on DraftKings. You like that? Little live on the fly intro. All right, what's going on? Adam Kaufman, Chirag here, and Matt Meiselman. This is the Slate. We've got you for another half hour or so before the next Madden simulation takes over on the DK YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter channels. If you have any questions, you have any thoughts, you have any concerns, you have anything, let us know. We are here for you to break down largely a 6-game slate in the association on the hardwood tonight, where we were just talking about it off air, fellas. Meiselman, you in particular, there's not necessarily a lot of right now pressing news as we sit, an hour and a half away from lineups locking anyway, and games this slate officially getting underway. There's not a lot that we're waiting on as it relates to betting necessarily on the DraftKings Sportsbook, but from a DFS perspective, from a fantasy perspective, and everyone out there trying to build lineups and make some cash tonight, well, there is some stuff that we're waiting on here. So I welcome you first to the program, and you tell me what's standing out to you first and foremost.
Yeah, there's a ton of news that for betting purposes, we just don't need to care about that much. But for DFS, it's a lot of players who might be fringe rotation guys, but they're relevant for our lineups. Like, as you said, Daniel Gafford is the chalk. You don't need to be that good of a basketball player to be relevant for DFS. And this is a pretty good example of that. So for betting purposes, like, we do have Fred VanVleet questionable. I don't have really a strong lean on if he plays or not. And then same for Anthony Edwards and Jared Vanderbilt for Minnesota. So those are worth keeping an eye on for betting. LeBron would be important, obviously, too, but I think the questionable tag is just a formality at this point. He basically is just playing with that. For some reason, the Lakers just want to list him questionable every single game. But we have all these other players that are supplementary pieces that we have to wait on, and they could be pretty relevant for lineups. So Andre Drummond and Cameron Thomas and Garrison Matthews and Kevin Porter Jr. Although just a quick point, and then I'll let Chirag give his thoughts on this stuff. Garrison Matthews is the Rockets' best player. So that one actually does matter. But the rest of these guys for a lot of these other teams, whether or not DJ Augustine suits up tonight, I don't think that really matters either. But yeah, maybe Garrison Matthews is someone that I should have given more credit to, because he does make a big difference for Houston.
He was a Celtic in the offseason, Chirag. It pains me. They didn't give him a deal. They let him walk because why? They needed shooting. Why keep Garrison Matthews? And sure enough, lighten it up for Houston. Granted, a very bad team, but he's putting up numbers.
I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. You get your chance, you step up, and you make it happen.
He's doing it. So,
yep.
What are you watching for here?
Well, I'm going to be a DraftKings Sportsbook ad for a really quick second and say that there's an awesome special that is for tonight's highest total game, which is between Golden State and Minnesota. Curry to hit 5 threes and Cat to hit 3 threes, plus 425. Click the button and you can place the same game parlay really quickly on the DraftKings Sportsbook. There's going to be more of those. I'm working on with the DraftKings Sportsbook team to get more of these cool same game parlays, trending top picks, different types of bets. If you were able to catch me on the NBA bet stream, we are doing it, trying to get people some really cool stuff to follow along with. I think that's what we're trending towards. Like, hey, if you're gonna make some picks, let's have some fun with it. So having some fun with it, and I would like to definitely look to build around Steph Curry tonight. I know it's easy to go to Luka Doncic with everything that's been going on. Trae Young coming off a monster game. Jason Tatum playing against Atlanta, that's always a good spot. But I just think that there's an opportunity here with Klay Thompson not playing. Obviously, Klay Thompson is not the Klay Thompson of old. He's not dropping 30 points on a regular, but he's still taking up a fair amount of usage. We've seen the usage drop for Curry, and I just believe that Steph Curry is the player to build around for tonight's slate.
Matt, let me take that over to you, because looking at some ownership projections for, again, a light 6-game slate, Chirag mentioned Luka. Luka is far and away the most popular guy among that top tier of price point. Obviously, he's 12K. He's pricey. He's the most expensive guy. He's projected to be owned a third of lineups, or pretty close to it, about 31% of lineups. You look down at Steph Curry, who, again, his pricing, he's 10-8. And you can see the game log. He's done very well of late, last couple games going over 50 fantasy points, but he is projected to be owned about 16% of lineups. So basically half that of Luka. So does that actually, I appreciate Chirag's perspective, but for you, could he be viewed as almost more of a pivot for tonight?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that Luka probably does deserve to be about twice as owned as Curry. So the fact that that's the ownership disparity, if that's what it ends up being, 33% roughly to 16% roughly, like that just seems fair to me. So the decision for me for who to pay up for, well, first of all, I think there are a lot of options. And then I think there is news that could dictate who you want to pay up for. So if VanVleet and Anunoby sit, then Pascal Siakam maybe is a better play to pay up for. And same for Karl Anthony Towns if Jared Vanderbilt, and then especially if Anthony Edwards are out. So the decision for me might be actually more of a late swap move, and Luka doesn't play until 10. So you don't really have to decide this before lock. But I think playing Curry in a lineup where you otherwise are playing a lot of chalky players, that makes sense. And if you're going contrarian elsewhere, I think Luka's fine. Like, I don't really have a strong take here as far as which guard to pay up for. It's more about, I think, setting up your lineup in a way that makes sense where you can capitalize on the news that comes through and the timing and all of that. And also the way that, like, we've talked about this in the past, this slate isn't as staggered as some of the previous ones, but let's say it's 7:45 and you can potentially swap Luka or Curry, and you still haven't decided what you want to do for your final lineup yet. You can see how the lineup's doing, and if the lineup is already off to a really good start, it makes more sense to just ride with Luka, because really the only concern with him is how popular he is. I mean, it's just so much more that he's doing for his team, especially with the rebounding compared to someone like Curry, where they're pretty similar in most other categories, but Doncic is putting up 10 plus rebounds basically most games at this point. The assists are actually down, but he's also scoring more than Curry is. I think overall he's a better fantasy player, but Steph will be a lot lower owned. So it kind of just depends what you're doing elsewhere. And then you could just avoid both of these guys. I do think there is an opportunity to play cheaper guards and pay up for bigs, which is probably not the route most people are going to go. So let's say you want to play a pretty contrarian Karl Anthony Towns and a Pascal Siakam in the same lineup. Let's say VanVleet's out and he becomes a better play. And then maybe we get news that Edwards is sitting and you want to pay down for someone like Malik Beasley, who people may not get to if they're trying to fit in the value plays for the 7:00 game. So I think inverting the build where Luka is the most popular pay up and Gafford is the most popular cheap guy, and instead paying up at center and using cheaper guards, I think that's where I'm leaning right now. But obviously this is very dependent on which news we get and also when we get it, because there's a lot that we still don't know yet.
You know what, though, Chirag, and this is, again, true in this moment. We'll see what news comes in the next hour as we get closer to lock. But right now, I mean, you could just, and I'm not saying do this, but this is just an example. You could look at some value guys, some sub 5K guys that are in great spots tonight. There's, Jonathan Kuminga, there's DeAndre Hunter, there's obviously Daniel Gafford we've talked about, there's Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, there's Dwight Howard, who's been playing well of late now that he's gotten an opportunity, there's Rui Hachimura. Again, I'm not advocating for someone to put all of those guys in their build, but what I am saying is you could, if you're debating between Steph and Luka, I mean, you could very easily put both in your lineup and still build a very good lineup for the evening.
Honestly, the way that I would look at that, Matt mentioned that questionable tag with Anthony Edwards. There's no confirmation if he's going to play or not play, but maybe looking at, putting Steph in the utility spot, using Luka in your guard slot, because the reason is you'll have the ability to switch Karl Anthony Towns, who is just 700 cheaper than Steph. So that's how I would look at it, is waiting. All right, if we're going to have these two guys and we're going to potentially use them due to all the value, make sure that Steph is the one that's in the utility spot because of that potential opportunity to swap to Cat.
Cat, another guy, he's cooled down the last couple of games, but obviously before that was doing really well. Just looking at his game log, close to right around 50 plus, upwards of almost 70 going back a couple of weeks in that game against Charlotte. So as we know, obviously a lot of good output for him. So if you did want to, I think it was Matt that brought this up before, if you wanted to do what projects to be the unpopular thing based on, again, ownership projections, and just say, forget it. Like, I'm going to fade them both. You're not going to play Steph or Luka, and you're going to pay down at guard and pay up at some of the forwards. You've got Towns, obviously, you mentioned. You got Jason Tatum. You obviously have LeBron. You've got, Kyle Kuzma, if you want to call him a pay up at 9,200, the way he's been playing of late. Just some of the, I know you got to be loving the resurgence now that he's in.
No longer for season long perspective, I did draft Kuz because I knew he was going to go off, but my team sucks, so it doesn't matter.
So which big dude then would you like to make a case for? Is it Towns, who you were just talking about? Is there another guy that you like just as much or better?
Well, I mean, Matt mentioned it. We have to keep an eye open also for Siakam. So Fred VanVleet and Anthony Edwards, due to their potential minutes and usage, are the two guys that are directly impacting the slate. And both the players that you can swap them in for are centers. So I think a lot of people are going to use that Daniel Gafford center slot. So that was another reason to play Steph at utilities, because are you already giving up your center slot? And then Dwight Howard, another guy you mentioned, he's been playing a little bit better. So there are viable center options. Isaiah Stewart's been playing better. You can even look at Al Horford. Yeah, he's not, maybe he had his little down game, but he was coming off some nice performances, playing 36 minutes in the previous. So there's a lot of center options. So I think that's what's going to also keep the ownership down on Cat and Siakam, even though they have the most news to impact them.
What about you, Matt?
Well, this is kind of a separate concern, also related, but one of the things I'm worried about for this slate is just the way that Minnesota's played on back-to-backs recently.
Yep.
They have just been awful on the second leg of back-to-backs. And the sample size I'm using is 2 games. So this is highly just a subjective take, but the results have been so poor the last 2 times they've had back-to-backs. And they've both been, this isn't dating back a really long time where we're just drawing from, old samples where players were playing different roles and everything like that. This is the 3rd time in their last 6 games that they're going to be on a back-to-back. So before the All-Star break, they played Toronto on the second night of the 2-game stretch. And then the first game out of the All-Star break, they then went on a back-to-back and played Philly. And they were blown out at home by the Raptors without Fred VanVleet. And then they were blown out by the Sixers. That was James Harden's first game. I mean, that was a little more excusable, but this Minnesota team, for whatever reason, and part of why I'm looking at this more than I normally would, is the betting lines have been dinging them for reasons that I can't really explain other than this. Maybe this is just a team that doesn't respond well playing back-to-back nights. I don't know if there's something predictive here or it's just, noise in a recent sample, but it seems like at least somewhat of a red flag just how bad it's been coming off a game that they just played. And we have injuries. We have 2 guys on the injury report in Edwards and Vanderbilt, who are both important players to the team. So this line had gotten to Minnesota as a small favorite last night. It opened, Minnesota was a small underdog, they moved to a small favorite. Now with this news, they're all the way up to 3-point underdogs. It probably gets even higher without them. I think Towns is going to be extremely contrarian, but I'm worried. And I know the Warriors had one of the worst second halves they've played all season against Dallas. I don't know if that means anything either way. Like, do they bounce back from that, or is it a sign of things to come where the team is just struggling? But either way, I have some reservations about the Wolves on the second leg of the back-to-back. But at the same time, I do think that this recent stretch makes it more likely that Edwards and Vanderbilt sit, because these guys have been so ineffective playing 2 nights in a row. And the players that would fill in for them, they didn't play big minutes last night, like Malik Beasley and Jaden McDaniels. So I think I want to try to prioritize those 2 players, Beasley and McDaniels, and maybe not Towns as much. Like, he does make a lot of sense as a contrarian option, and I do think it's worth looking there. But there are also other contrarian pay-ups, like we just mentioned, Kuzma. I mean, that's a really, really good matchup against the Pistons, and I don't think he'll be nearly as chalky as, let's say, Luka Doncic. We potentially have a $7,200 Robert Williams we could play at center, Christian Wood potentially. Like, there are a lot of guys, and that's not even including Trae Young, Jason Tatum, like a lot of guys that have a lot of upside tonight. So maybe Minnesota, like, that's kind of long-winded way of just talking around Towns without giving a real strong take there. But I think looking to the Wolves guys who may fill in is my preference over playing guys like Towns and Russell.
Kuzma about 16%, so right along with Steph Curry, about half of what Luka in terms of projected ownership right now. And just taking a look to see what Minnesota looks like in terms of their key personnel. Highest owned player projected wise for Minnesota, D'Angelo Russell is sitting at about 15.5%. Patrick Beverley right around 14%. Then Karl Anthony Towns at about 12%. That's what it's looking like right now.
Yeah, and then it obviously will change depending on the timing of this news. So let's say we found out 2 minutes from now that that Edwards and Vanderbilt aren't playing, and then we get the news soon that McDaniels and Beasley are starting. Like, those guys are now the chalk. Right. But if that news doesn't come until 7:40, then by that point, people have locked in Gafford. They're playing KCP. They're playing potentially Scotty Barnes, who we haven't talked about yet if Van Vliet's out. Like, a lot of roster spots will be taken up at that point. So my biggest consideration for this slate by far is just essentially the order that the news comes in, because the news that breaks earliest is going to create the most ownership, and the stuff that comes later is just going to be harder to react to. I mean, hypothetically, let's say LeBron gets ruled out late, like maybe the questionable tag is real and he kind of tweaked his knee towards the end of last game. Like, let's say maybe there actually is something there. If LeBron got ruled out at 9:30, like, no one's going to be on Westbrook. There just won't be. You're not going to pivot off Luka to play Westbrook, or very few people will do that. And the amount of people carrying multiple slots into the late game, it's just not going to be a lot. So the point there is just the order of the news and the timing of the news. That is, I think, an especially large consideration for this slate compared to most slates.
So what's the lineup building strategy then? Are you largely going to, not outright, like you still may want to play Gafford or something like that, or are you largely going to fade the first game or two, just to, depending at least if you don't have news by, say, 6:50 and you want to wait this thing out a little bit, is that going to be the approach?
Yeah, I think Gafford's the one who I think it's okay to play just because points per dollar, he's more can't miss than some of these other guys. Like, I almost want to just say fade KCP outright, assuming we don't have news at the time that game starts, because like that's a pretty valuable roster spot for someone priced in the 4,000s. And he's only even relatively chalky right now because we don't have these other guys ruled out yet. So to be stuck on someone like Caldwell Pope or Corey Kispert, or even Rui Hachimura, who I potentially like as a Gafford pivot, to be stuck on some of those guys, and then maybe the other side of that game too with, I don't know, Kelly Olynyk could be an interesting pivot under normal circumstances. To be stuck on players from that first game who have lower upside, like, I just think is a bad move. So yeah, from a lineup building strategy, I think you play maybe one Wizards player, and then you can kind of wait till that 7:30 block and analyze there, because chances are we're going to know something by 7:15 to 7:30. Like, I don't know when the Wolves news is coming, but we'll know Van Vliet's game locks at 7:30. So that's really the big one that can dictate a lot of the decisions, is if Van Vliet, if his status isn't known until after the 7 o'clock game locks. I think that's the situation where you want to avoid a lot of these chalky Wizards guys.
Chirag, Miguel in the chat here, and we appreciate everyone for being here with us in the chat, had asked about top value plays for tonight a while ago in this program. I don't know, a good 10 minutes or so ago. I shouted out about a half dozen, but who do you like?
I mean, there's an opportunity for Moses Moody to make an impact. He's at 3K. He started in the previous game against Dallas, played 25 minutes. Yeah, he's not scoring a lot of points, but he's flashed that upside. He's flashed 30-point upside. So maybe that's somebody to consider. Like I said, Klay Thompson not playing tonight. He's dealing with an illness, expected to play on Thursday. There's going to be guys. You mentioned Kuminga. There's going to be guys that are going to be stepping up. Kuminga is only 4,600, and he's also flashed 40-point upside. So there's a chance that he could start in this position. So I think looking at these guys that are just going to be slotting in there's so many value options. And you could even look at, yes, Amir Coffey isn't breaking the slate, but he has broken the slate. And at 3,600, there's something to be considered. That there's so many cheap guys to look at. Like, it literally is, I honestly can't even keep up with it, because what you have to then decide is who are you paying up for first? Start from where you're paying up for, because that will then decide, do you use a guard? Do you use a center? Do you use a forward as your values? Because I think that's where this slate, and that's where I kind of started at the top, is like, I think it makes a little bit more of a difference who you start with at the top than it does at the bottom, because there's so many values interchangeable.
There's no question, Matt, and we got you for another 5-10 minutes. If anyone has any questions, shout them out. You can we'll get to the DK Sportsbook as well too. But from a DFS perspective, you look at top value options for tonight, just in a broad, painting it with a broad brush. Washington, Golden State, those would be your two teams to target. But as you look at these games tonight in particular, like, you know, Atlanta and Boston, over under 226 on the DK Sportsbook, 231 for Golden State and Minnesota, 227 LA and Houston. So when it comes to lineup building, if you're just trying to target certain games, never mind certain players, but certain games where you're expecting a lot of points, which one are you looking at first and foremost?
I think it is this Golden State Minnesota game, and especially because we could have value plays open up from Minnesota. And like what Chirag was talking about before, if you are playing Curry instead of, let's say, Trae Young, you have an extra 30 minutes to maneuver your lineup. I mean, let's say we get this, I think it's maybe a 5% chance this happens, that LeBron doesn't play tonight, but that news could come between 7:30 and 8. Like most nights when you try to game plan in this time-based way, you're probably not going to hit the perfect result where the news just comes in a certain window where you have an advantage over everyone, right? Like if you play Curry over Trae and LeBron's rolled out at 750, you are in a much better position to pivot to Lakers than other people because you have more guys from Wolves Warriors. So to me, it's not like I'm targeting the game specifically because I think it's going to be the highest scoring game. I think that targeting that game gives you the most flexibility to adjust based on what the news is. And it doesn't have to be LeBron. It could just be this Edwards and Vanderbilt news. And to me, those are important enough where playing 8 o'clock players over 7:30 players, like let's say you have two guys that you like that are the same price, one's at 7:30 and one's at 8. You just break that tie with the fact that the 8 o'clock game is later because just more can happen before we get to that. So obviously this could change, right? Like we're getting some news now that, and if it starts to roll in, the more the news breaks before lock, the less this is going to matter. You know, if we find out all the news in the next 10 minutes, everything I just said goes out the window. But yeah, Drummond is the one we just got. He's out for this game tonight.
What about for you, Chirag? Which one are you looking at?
For Sportsbook?
For just a game to target in general when it comes to, I guess, DFS first, of just one that's going to produce a lot of points, and therefore you think that's a game that guys are going to be most impactful for your lineups.
I've been talking about this Golden State Minnesota game from the top, and I'm not going to stop there. I think there's value options, pay up options. I think there's a lot of options here, but what's to keep in mind too is that the Lakers are not exactly good on defense. As a Lakers fan, watch many games, this team doesn't really care to get back. And the total is low because I say the total is low because of what the Lakers bring to the table. And that's kind of what it is. Yes, Dallas plays a little bit slower pace, but you have an option where you have these other guys that have kind of stepped up into new roles. Spencer Dinwiddie playing a little bit better off the bench. Dorian Finney-Smith being solid. You have these guys, Dwight Powell coming off a monster game against the Utah Jazz, like Bertans, 3,500. He just comes in there and literally has a green light to shoot threes. Like the Lakers are not that good on defense. So I would potentially, if you're maybe even it's a showdown lineup situation, but there's a lot to consider on in that late game where it could just get out of hand and the Lakers are like, well, whatever. And then you have a bunch of garbage time players that are just putting up free fantasy points.
I'm surprised to see this Drummond news has, at least temporarily just straight up knocked the Brooklyn-Toronto game off the DK Sports page.
I am too. Drummond doesn't matter for the outcome of the game. He's not.
No,
good.
but it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction to what the books have been doing lately. It's that like DK Sportsbook, when there's news that breaks, it's like, oh, we got to take this down because there's a potential edge that could be had. And until we figure out what the fair line is, it's better to take it down than it is to lose out on getting
Sure.
Taking a loss in that situation. So I look at it from kind of the sportsbook perspective.
Yeah, it makes sense. And for props in there too, like Drummond will affect those, even if he doesn't really affect the outcome of the game. It does look like we're getting our Raptors news to cut you off.
Let's go.
But my guess it hasn't come through yet. VanVleet's been a game time decision for like 4 games in a row.
Yep.
So it probably is going to be the case again where that one goes up to lock, but Anunoby's out for Toronto.
But even him being out is notable. I mean, I was running some projections and seeing him in optimal lineups for tonight. So the fact that he's not going to play, it's going to shake things up quite a bit, at least, at the top of the lineup building construction.
Yeah, although Barnes is priced up, I think he's someone we need to talk about a little because he was so good in last night's game.
Yeah.
And the recency bias is going to have to draw people towards him. Like 65 fantasy points from Scotty Barnes is more than he scores in 3 games combined in most weeks. And he put up 16 rebounds last night. I don't know how much Anunoby even affected that. Like he just was incredibly good. So, I mean, I'm just looking at this stat line again. 5 steals for him, 4 assists. Like I don't know how repeatable any of this is. That's not really a reach to say he's not going to do 65 fantasy points again. But his price is up high enough where I don't know. It's a tough spot because to me it's bad chalk if VanVleet's playing, and it's potentially just him being way underpriced if VanVleet's not playing. But Anunoby being out does help him a bit. But it does also seem like the Raptors starters play so many minutes anyway. And this has burned me trying to bet overs on Raptors props in other games where other guys have been out. The starters play so much of the game anyway that all we're really talking about is increased usage with someone like Anunoby or VanVleet out. It's not actually any extra minutes for Barnes. He's already playing probably 35 minutes anyway. What we're really just seeing is a boost for the bench guys who might enter the rotation and normally wouldn't play that much, like Kem Birch and Thaddeus Young, Chris Boucher, Malachi Flynn, especially if Fred VanVleet's out. So I don't know how important this is for Barnes, but here we go. I'll just keep breaking all the news. VanVleet's out now too. So if you guys want to.
Fred VanVleet has been ruled out. So are we looking at Siakam, or is it stay with the Barnes chalk?
Yeah, this is kind of to my point. Like he's not playing any extra minutes because of VanVleet being out.
Right.
You're just going to get a usage bump, which is, I think it's minor enough to not go crazy. Like Siakam's a better play now, but the ownership may adjust to it too fast. Like this was kind of my point about the Minnesota guys also. Like now we have the Toronto news first. We're going to see Barnes get really popular. Siakam is going to be more popular. I think Malachi Flynn, even not starting
3,100.
Yeah, he's cheap enough. Like people are going to want to play him. And he also put up 36 fantasy points last night. So he has recency bias going for him too. Yep. And with all of that in mind, if we get Anthony Edwards ruled out an hour from now, there just won't be nearly as many people. And especially if it's an hour and a half or an hour 40 minutes from now, people will not be reacting for Malik Beasley the way they're going to react for the Toronto guys. So this is now more reason to try to defer to 8 o'clock. But we may get the Wolves news before 7:30, and then that kind of changes things, obviously.
VanVleet rather had been projected for north of 40 fantasy points tonight. So does that, I mean, are you all but locking in Siakam now, or are you just loading up on some of the value around there?
I think it's it's weird to say. I don't think it changes a ton for the Toronto starters. I think I like Siakam a little more, but his ownership is going to go up. So overall, I think that's net neutral. And I think Barnes probably gets more of an ownership bump than a projection bump. Like to me, Barnes is going to be a worse play now because I think everyone's going to be very excited to play him. It's the same situation as last night. They're playing the same team, and he just had 65 fantasy points. And now it's like this is the headline news that Toronto's missing VanVleet again. So yeah, I think Barnes will probably get. I mean, I don't know if he'll be more popular than Gafford, but I think he winds up somewhere in that neighborhood in the 40 to 50% range. And like Scotty Barnes is not that reliable of a fantasy producer. He's fine, and he has upside. Like he's had a bunch of big games and most of them are recent, but the Raptors spread the ball around. Like this could just be a Siakam game where Barnes doesn't do that much. Gary Trent, we haven't even mentioned yet, he could be the guy taking all the shots. Trent was pretty ineffective last night. we could just see like Trent's more rested because he didn't have to play as much in last night's game, and he's the guy who takes over the offense tonight. So I think I'm less interested in Barnes than before. Maybe slightly more interested in Siakam, but I think everyone else will be too.
All right, we're going to go in just a moment. If anyone missed it, if you've been, obsessed with all things NBA during this program, like we have been, and not paying attention to what is going on outside of the world of basketball, Major League Baseball has officially canceled the first 2 series of the regular season, which means the March 31st opening day no longer a thing. We're going to have to wait, and potentially wait much longer. A statement from Major League Baseball, of course, it says Rob Manfred and MLB's owners that canceled the start of the season. Just paraphrasing or going through some of the statement here. From the beginning of the negotiations, players' objectives have been consistent: to promote competition, provide fair compensation for young players, and uphold the integrity of our market system against the backdrop of growing revenues and record profits. We are seeking nothing more than a fair agreement. What Rob Manfred characterized as a defensive lockout is, in fact, the culmination of a decades-long attempt by owners to break our player fraternity. That is from MLBPA. So, not great, obviously, if you're a baseball fan, where things stand right now. But the good news is, if you just like games, well, there are basketball games tonight, 6 of them to pay attention to, as we have been breaking down in great detail. If you missed any of this show, a lot of this stuff is still relevant. You can go back and relive it before, obviously, Locke gets here in an hour. And over the course of the week, we'll have much more as it relates to Major League Baseball and whatever else is going on here on the Slate, the Sweat, wherever you are finding us on the DK channels. Want to thank producer Eamon, Daniel, our technical director, of course, Matt Chirag. Always a pleasure hanging out with you guys. Thank you, boys.
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm Adam. We'll see you again. Check us out, the Sweat, tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern, across the DraftKings channels. The Slate is tomorrow right around 5:15.